Are recording.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I was going to say good evening, but Andrea has told me it is indeed morning. So welcome to the Hopkinton School Board meeting on Saturday, December 12th. It's, as I said, it's 9 a.m. and we have a full board here with us this evening with Mr. Norm Goupel, Andrea Folsom, Seth A. Frame, Rob Nato, and Superintendent Steve Chamberlain, and me, Jim O'Brien. Thank you all for joining us for our Saturday edition. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Do you see that? Does that work?
We sure do. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we're meeting this morning virtually, and we can do this because of the governor's emergency declarations and emergency orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of those emergency orders allows for public bodies such as the Hopkinton School Board to meet fully remote. Before those emergency orders, there had to be a physical location for public meetings, but the emergency orders allows for business to be conducted virtually. So we've posted links for the public to be able to observe this meeting, both via the web, through Zoom, and also phone numbers where they can access the audio for this meeting. We'll also be recording this conversation and put that onto our website. All the other aspects of RSA 91A, which is the public right to know law, will be followed. So there'll be minutes of this meeting, which will be made available per the requirements of the statute. And then the other change that if there is a vote of the board tonight, that vote will be conducted via roll call. So it's a little different than a regular meeting, and it takes a tad bit longer, but that will be the only other change. With that said, Steve, are there any additions or deletions for the agenda this morning?
No, the agenda is fine as it stands.
I got to break my habit. I know we have correspondence. Steve?
Yes, there were a significant number of correspondence. I cleaned through about 8:30 this morning, and everyone that I received, I put in the correspondence folder. Some were before the last meeting, and some are in between the two meetings, but they've all been put in correspondence folders that I've received.
All right. So we have no minutes to approve this morning. This obviously isn't a regularly scheduled meeting, and so we'll approve our minutes from our previous meeting at our next meeting on Thursday. And I would just say, comments from the Hopkinton School Board, this is a special meeting that we decided to put forward and to have a conversation on really one agenda topic, which is our sports program for the winter sports and how we want to proceed. Based upon our conversation and public comment on Thursday, we wanted to schedule this in order to explore additional options, if there are any, for how we proceed with sports. The only other item that I would like to cover is a non-public session. And so at the end of our business meeting, I would ask for a motion to go into non-public under C for reputation. Are there any other comments from the school board before we begin? The only other thing I'll just say for the public who are viewing, there's not going to be public comment during this meeting. We have one agenda topic that I think we've covered pretty thoroughly, both at our Thursday meeting, before our Thursday meeting, and then we received a lot of correspondence over the last 24 plus hours. So I think we have the issues, and I think the board's ready to proceed in the conversation. So I appreciate that. So no presentations or staff reports, and so we will start our conversation. And where we left off, I think on Thursday at around 11 p.m. Was that Rob had, I don't say volunteered, maybe it was a little, maybe we did a little bit more than volunteer, Rob, but Rob was volunteered to try to put down on paper, some options that we can consider for moving forward. And so I know Rob has done that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rob to maybe walk us through some of his thinking. And then I know there's some discussion points that he has highlighted that we all believe that we should be having on this. So Rob, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. And Jim, I just sent you that. So if you want to share that, I'll do a little introduction. So if you can just bear with me, because I would sort of like to spend a minute to go through how I went from saying no to saying maybe on Thursday night, because I think it's important to a lot of what the community has asked about. So going into Thursday, my focus as a school board member was, protecting the school community, but also protecting the community as this virus continues to spread. And with the protecting the community piece in play, that brought me firmly to the decision of saying, this is not a good idea to move forward with winter sports. So during the public comment, and one of the things that crystallized for me, particularly from some of the students, and then a couple of the parents' willingness to open the door to other possibilities, was the mental health aspect. And people often will use social emotional. I'll use the words mental health because in my personal and professional career, dealing with students that are struggling with depression because of whatever is in their life is really important. And being mindful that that is a reality. There is a very strong difference from being sad and being upset because you have lost something and opening the doorway to what can be a crippling mental illness. So that brought me to, okay, what is my role as a school board member? And is it to protect the community or is it to protect the school community? And I have to come back to that although I would like to protect the overall community, I am not really sure that it's within my personal grasp or the grasp of this board to do that. We can't control where people go and eat. We can't control what activities people do. I drove by Concord High yesterday, about 11 o'clock in the morning, and saw lots of students walking down the sidewalk, unmasked, shoulder to shoulder. I kind of felt like what we're attempting to do at the community level is like putting a finger in a dike. Kids will go to field house sports. Kids will do those other things that people have talked about. So it brought me back to balancing risks. The risk of the physical health of our school community and also protecting the mental health of our students and student athletes. So, and as I've said to a few of the board members, initially inconsistency and I'll just say hypocrisy were on the forefront of my mind. And I think where I've come to is in this COVID world, it's going to be hard to avoid some level of hypocrisy. It's just, all things are not equal. Okay, so enough of that. That's the benchmark to the change. So the proposal that I am suggesting, number one, is that basketball and hockey would be allowed to continue with the understanding that when we're no longer remote and back in a hybrid model, some form of additional protections for the school community need to be in place. Chris Kelly shared with me some comments from other schools as to what they're doing, and many are not doing this. One gentleman, I think from Nashua, said, well, so what you're saying is it's really dangerous, but we're going to let you do it anyway. You just have to go remote. Yes, that is exactly what we're saying. That is exactly what I'm saying. It should be clear that this is an increased risk. And I don't want to dance around that subject. In my mind, it is an increased risk, and therefore it means increased responsibility. Indoors is different from outdoors. This is not the fall. This is winter. We are indoors in a different environment, and it is unknown. So my preference would be that basketball and hockey athletes remain remote for the duration of the season. If we do go back to a hybrid model, if we stay remote and conditions stay hot red, then this is a moot point. There are concerns, and this would be a point of discussion about, well, what does that mean if the athlete has a sibling who's also in school? Because then obviously they have been open to being infected and still sitting in that classroom next to that other person. And there's been a lot of talk about voluntary, and it is voluntary to choose to play a sport, but it's not voluntary for the person that you're sitting next to in class to increase their risk level and their family's risk level because you've made a choice to play basketball or hockey. And again, I'm just trying to be straight here, so take that as it's coming. I think we need to have some very clear messaging, and I would like to thank the coaches that sent some information. Dennis, excuse me for getting your last cola mining. I read your letter early this morning and it was really helpful in my mindset. I've always respected you as a coach, and it seems really clear that you understand the gravity of what's going on, and I trust that you will do what's best for your athletes. But I think, and I would hope that teams would have strong discussions that mask habits need to be totality of behavior, not just what you're doing at hockey and basketball, but what you're doing everywhere. Because if you're executing risky COVID behavior outside of that, you're putting your teammates at risk. So I would strongly encourage teams to build their own codes of conduct that keep players safe, teams safe, their extended families safe as best you can. Also, develop a clear and adhere to a clear quarantine policy for teams. I know we have nuances of that are out there, but I think that for these two sports, something along the lines of, if there is a case on a team, then that team needs to quarantine for 10 to 14 days, however we choose to do that. And that would be, the role of Dan, Amy, Chris, Steve, whoever Steve decides that that's the best person to lead that charge, that would be something they would do. And on this point, I want to talk a little bit about honesty. And again, if my directness this morning disturbs some people, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be direct. There have been schools where policies have been in place where there's sort of been a developed omerta. If you have symptoms or you think you might be positive, you just mysteriously drift away for a few days so the team doesn't have to shut down. That cannot happen. We're extending this opportunity. There needs to be a great deal of responsibility on everybody's part to be honest about what is happening for the safety of your teammates, the community, your families, etc. 4, to develop and circulate and adhere to clear conditions under which sports will not be allowed to continue by January 7th. What is the go, no go line? Jim asked the other night, where is that point? Is there a point where the school district says, conditions are such that this just no longer makes sense? When will we cross that line? So I think that is a very fair question. And I think it's something that we would ask again, the athletic leadership, the nursing staff, Steve, to come up with something that says, this is what we think. If we cross this area, we're beyond the point of no return. We've got to shut it down. And if that could happen, prior to January 7th, that way we've got a little lead time before actual games begin. No fans at games to start would be part of the proposal. Dan could work to say, the possibility of a senior night for senior parents. But again, we want to mitigate risks as best we can. There's been a request for some discussion of 6 feet in masks, that be maintained, a skills and drills approach versus usual practice protocols. I think the desire of the coaches is to move towards usual practice protocols, but keeping safety in mind as best they can so they can prepare for a season. And that, that balance is this for activity or is this for games? And we'll leave that open to discussion. My daughter reminded me last night that when I was coaching the first day of practice, I would say it really annoyed me when people would complain about coming to practice. And I would remind the kids that we have about 70 events during a Nordic season, 60 of which are practice. So if you're not enjoying practice, you're probably here for the wrong reasons. So, that sort of fits in that blend a little bit. And I think what I didn't put on the list is the reality that the board, at its discretion, given that things can change quickly, would, perhaps need to reconsider what we're doing. So the intent is of the proposal to keep kids playing, keep practices moving, create a very strong environment, adding to some of the protocols that are in place to protect them, protect their families, and protect the school community. And I think, as I'm looking at my notes here, that I've covered what I wanted to cover. So thanks for listening to that introduction, and I'll open the floor.
Thanks, Rob. And thanks. I mean, I think over the last 24 hours, I think you've probably gotten a lot of feedback based on Thursday's meeting. And I know you were nice enough to have a couple long conversations with me about this proposal. And so thanks for taking it on and putting these pieces together over the last day or so. So I guess I'm just trying to think through how to have this conversation with the five of us in a way that kind of moves us along. So maybe the best thing to do is I'll keep this proposal up on the screen so everybody can see it, and we could just walk through right now the 6 points that we have here. See how people are feeling about each one, maybe dissect them a little bit, have a conversation, and then see where we're all at when we get to the bottom, and see if there's anything additional we want to add. Does that sound Lisa, like a plan to move us ahead? See nod, so that's always a good sign. So why don't we start here with number one, which is I think maybe the crux of where Rob started here, which is if we're going to do hockey, basketball, that those athletes remain remote if we go back to a hybrid model. How are people feeling about that?
How long is it?
Go ahead, Andrea.
I just had a question. How long is the season usually?
I think this year, I think we're talking about from January 11th, I think is when games can begin through. I think we're talking 4 to 5 weeks regular season and then a week or two of playoffs. And just to add, the NHIA medical community for any playoff system at all, 100% masks. If you remember last year, there in the fall, there were some issues about that, but the parent organization has codified that in order to participate in the tournament, you must have full masks. Just so you know, and that NHIA only controls by their bylaws the tournament, not necessarily the school-based rules, but for the tournament, it has required that, just for an FYI.
Thank you. Okay, so anybody else want to comment on that? So it seems like there's, I mean, to me, this is sort of, if we're going to move forward, this feels like a really important, probably necessary thing. I struggle with the message of it a little bit. And I think if the board wants to move forward, this feels like a very practical, pragmatic thing to do. So,
Jim, what do you think the message is, just so I understand?
Oh, I think if we do go back to a hybrid model, just the school district suggests saying that we have such high risk activities that we're not going to allow students into our buildings. Like that feels like a mixed message. Like in-person education is really important, and you're doing an activity sanctioned by the school board that's so that we're saying is defining as so high risk that you can't enter the school building. Feels odd, but we're in an odd situation, so I can appreciate it.
Right. So just to get some clarity, I mean, my view of that is we're offering even in the best of times here, we're offering very little in-person schooling, and we're balancing, I think, as Rob laid out, what the pluses here are. And the minus is a minus in this way, but it ends up being a small minus. Now, we may be upset about that, but I think that's just the reality that we have. And so while I agree with you, I think that it's mitigated by the limited amount of in-school we have to begin with.
Yeah, and I'm also, I think we talked about it a lot at the last meeting. I'm also just thinking, looking at trajectory of cases and thinking about the holidays and what's going to happen, what we saw after Thanksgiving, what we anticipate we'll see after Christmas, that, when we go back to a hybrid model is in my mind unclear anyway. I'd like us to get back, but it's unclear. And so it may be at some point a moot point because, depending on how long we remain sort of where we are. It's unfortunate, but it's true.
Part of me feels like it's going backwards a little bit. In this process when we started, we were full remote, to educate our students, and we weren't in our schools at all. And now we're discussing having our students pick and choose education or sports. And a lot of the people who commented the other night, I will point out, were the ones that were asking us to find a way to be able to have their student get more AP courses, get their kid more chemistry lab time and all that. And now as a parent, we are having this pick and choose on what is our position. And, we're a board of education. I firmly believe sports is important for individuals for social and emotional development and mental health. But we also, we have to understand the mental health aspect of students who don't play sports. The students that go to school, that strive in person, but yet are being told they can't go to school and that they have to be remote because of the fact that we can't educate them. mental
Well-
health is a lot of different angles that we need to have that discussion.
Norm, can I just respond to that a little bit?
Sure, please,
Um,
please. I'm not trying to argue. I just want to try and give a little bit of a perspective from.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that part of my rationale, and I hope the rationale of this is that it does consider those kids that are not student athletes, because they go to school with some level of trepidation and concern about COVID, and it hopefully puts them at ease a little bit that their risk is less because we've put this condition in place. So it keeps the schools open more so than not. If we do get back, as Jim said, it's a wild card. Who knows what's going to happen in mid-January, 5+ weeks away. So I think in some ways, maybe it does help those students, and that there is an equity piece that, you've chosen to do something, but there's also, an opportunity cost that goes along with that, balancing that right and responsibility.
Yeah, I would also say that I don't feel, I mean, I don't love the idea, but I completely understand the idea of having these specific student athletes needing to be remote. I would not say, however, that they're choosing between sports and education. I think if we're considering remote education not education, then that's a whole other giant discussion that we need to have. I think what they're choosing between are two different types of educational modalities. And if you would like to, as it's put forward, if you would like to play these specific sports, the educational modality that will be open to you is remote learning. And it looks like this would get us right up to February break. And then after that, it would be the winter. It appears that the winter sports season would be over, at least for these two sports. So I would just say, I don't love hearing that we're conceptualizing this as thinking that you're choosing sports or education, because I don't think you are. I think you're choosing between two different types of educational modalities, which are very different. You're still going to get the education. You're just going to get it in a remote setting, which a bunch of our kids already do.
But some
by
of them
choice.
struggle. Some of them struggle. Some of them are in the corner, upset that they can't process what they're trying to get through on a computer. There's a lot of kids who are in our community who are struggling remotely, and we're having a discussion about sports. Why are we not having a discussion about opening our schools up?
So can I just, this is maybe just a point of process, because I think we could discuss these points for a very long time, each one, and probably go into the evening, which Seth doesn't want us to do. And so I guess my suggestion here for this conversation, I think I'll just start with where I think reality of the board is. I think there's probably three of us who would like to see us move forward with some sort of winter sports program for these two sports. And so I think, just reading the tea leaves, I think that's true. And so what I guess I would like us to focus on is what the proposal looks like. So rather than debate each of these points one by one and the pros and cons of each one, which is important, I think it's probably going to speed up our conversation and help us get to like an actual proposal that we would vote on if we go through these and say, I think this one should be in a proposal if we're going to move forward, or this doesn't have to be in that proposal. And that might help us kind of move forward to get to a proposal that we could all then vote on and see where we're at. Because otherwise, I think we might just be here all afternoon. And I think all the points that we're all making are valid, true. Again, we've been saying this for a while, there's no right answer. It's really, what do we want to see in a proposal if we were to move forward with these two sports? And then we can reflect on the totality of the package and see how that feels. Does that make sense? All right, thanks. So again, I would just go back to, do we, is there anybody who doesn't, maybe that's one way, is there anybody who doesn't feel like this aspect should be in a proposal for these two sports? And then the question would be, do we have concerns about, siblings of athletes? Choosing something, again, high risk scenario, family units are what we do know is family units do increase the spread. That's sort of one of the main ways that it is spreading is among family units. how do people feel about that?
Jim, Norm, do you want to go?
Go for it, Rob.
Go ahead, Rob.
I'll jump in on this one. And Jim and I did have some long conversations yesterday and some texting that went on. And when he brought this back as texting and the concern about the sibling, I think my initial response was touche, good point. And it is a good point, but I don't know if I've got an answer. I'm not sure if the board has an answer as to how to resolve that. I do feel like we have 5 weeks to think about how to mitigate that scenario. So I'm laying it on the table as something that we need to figure out. And, with the help of the families involved, with Dan, with the nursing staff and Steve, that we can figure that out in the next 5 weeks. But I don't think that, I don't think there's a resolution to that this morning that we would come to. So I think it's a very valid concern, but I do think we've got 5 weeks to slay that dragon.
And you would say we have 5 weeks because we're not going to face an in-person day for a long time here?
Correct.
Yeah, we're closed through the 19th of January. So that does make sense, Rob.
And even then, if we continued on with 2 more weeks of remote as we start back just under the regular schedule, we're already into February, and we could be talking about at most 1 week, meaning 2 days for a sibling of school. So it sounds like a huge decision, and I'm just saying this to the community. It sounds like a huge decision, but it's actually going to end up being a relatively small decision. And my view would be consistency would say if we do have an in-person day, siblings coaches should be subject to the same rules as the students, because my concern is this is a high-risk activity. And I just want to say that I'm going to vote to do this. You all know that. But I want to associate myself with what Rob said, and I said it on Thursday. I'm not choosing this because it's safe, completely safe. I'm choosing it on a balance of risks and what I think my responsibilities are to the students in the town. But I'm also very concerned about putting people in the schools, because when we put people in the schools, we're telling them you have to be there. And that creates an obligation on us to mitigate the risk as best we can in our schools. And having students or coaches in the school, that increases the risk, and we're forcing all of those people to be there with other people. And so I think it's a small sacrifice that we can cover in just in terms of timing. So I agree with Rob, we can figure it out, but my instinct right now is they should be covered.
I'm also wondering if it could be something that we loop into point 3 under the quarantine policy, where I don't know if perhaps we would ask that whomever is putting together the quarantine policy would consider that if a team is required to quarantine, then at that point, any siblings associated with team members would also need to quarantine. But I agree. I think that this is not something we need to come down on right this moment, but continue monitoring.
The only,
Right.
oh, go ahead, Norm, sorry.
No, go Jim, go.
Well, I was gonna say, the only reason to consider it today at all would be for families who are choosing to do basketball. I have no, again, if we were going to impose this type of restriction sometime in January, there may be families who that might become a surprise and may not actually like that or not choose to do that. So anyway,
Right.
I think, I'm not sure we have to come down today on it, but I do think if we're going to do something like that, it's probably worth getting done sooner than later, so that just, again, so all families understand the rules of the road. It doesn't come up later on.
Well, we should certainly say in this proposal, while we have not definitively decided that, it is a real and distinct possibility. And if your child is playing sports, you need to understand that this may happen, and you're in no position to complain about that if it does. As we put you on notice.
That's fair. Norm, I'm sorry, I started talking. You were going. You want to add something?
Yeah, no, I'm just so is the first step that this is integrated and already play against other teams, or is this just us moving forward a little bit right now with more practice?
I think yep, that's number 6 on the list, and so I think, yeah, so we'll get there. So I think right now
I just don't want to go an order or something, if I'm like committed to a season or whatnot, you know, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and.
Yeah, you're not, so right now you're not committing to
Okay.
anything. So we're just
Okay.
trying to get I'm trying to get a proposal. Like if this were going to be a motion, I'm just trying to get what those pieces of the motion are so that when we all end up voting, we know what we're voting on. So that's what I'm trying to get to.
Okay, it's too early, that's why.
No, I appreciate it. Okay, so what I'm hearing now, the consensus is, let me repeat it, just make sure I get nodding heads. The consensus is we keep number 1 in. And then I think the concern about siblings and coaches is real, in that it's something that we're going to keep unpacking, but that families who are going to have athletes engage in this should be aware that this may become a restriction that they should consider. Does that sound fair? It's not articulate, but okay, I see nodding. So move on to number 2, around codes of conduct for teams around mask habits and how they play. I assume this is something that our coaches have been doing for fall sports. And so is there anything new here, Rob, that you think, I mean, I don't personally disagree with any of that. So I just wonder if there's anything new that we're looking for. Is it really just an emphasis?
I think it's an emphasis, but I think that it's also an emphasis of what behavior should look like when you're away from your team. We have a co-curricular agreement around drugs and alcohol that says that if people consume drugs or alcohol, that there are ramifications to that, and self-reporting changes that element. We give people the opportunity to come in and say, hey, I need some help, I did a bad thing. So it's just extending the conversation beyond just what happens at practice to a more mindful approach to what they should be doing in their everyday lives. And again, we can't regulate that, but as an educational institution, we can certainly emphasize it and encourage it. That's why it's there.
Can I add to that? Maybe this fits in here. We've had a lot of discussion about, well, kids are going to go play other places if we don't offer something. We're going to offer something. So I'd like to encourage the kids not to engage in other organized athletics outside of the town during this 6-week period. I don't know that we can mandate that, and I don't want to end up us being the AAU police. But I hope that just like we're acting in good faith, the families are going to act in good faith, and I think it's fair to make that request.
Do we
Can
still?
we do that, Steve?
Sorry?
Can this board say, code of conduct that, what, if you're playing hockey for Hopkinton, during this pandemic, you can't be playing over in, Massachusetts, or, places, if we want to control the spread, are we able to mandate that as a board?
Well, the NHIA requires that school-based activities take priority over ancillary activities. If the board wanted to prohibit it, I don't know how you police it. We don't have any ability to, travel throughout and do it. I think encouraging it or mandating, I struggle with, and we don't want to do the Facebook, Instagram monitoring, and I think it's a priority, but without being able to enforce it, I'm concerned. And then it's piece, we find out about this one, but Steve, there's 10 people doing this, and all of us, I just think it sets us up for a very complex enforcement protocol that is beyond our resources and beyond our ability. And that opens us up for selective enforcement, which is a nightmare for Dan, Chris, and me.
Which is why I would frame it as a request. I don't think we have the bandwidth to do an enforcement, but I know all the people are listening to this meeting who care about this. And the board is taking a big step here in trying to do something for the kids in the community. And we're trying to identify all the risks. In the good faith response of those families is do everything they can to work with us. And so this would be that step.
I mean, we're asking parents to take their kids out of sports that don't pertain to what we're trying to do. I mean, there has to be some type of common ground, some type of level of responsibility on everyone. I do agree with, some comments the other night saying, we can go elsewhere. Absolutely. I know you can. And you can bring that spread into this community. And, we're trying to find a responsible way of saying, we want to support you. We want to do this. We want to do that. But it starts with the parents. And it starts with the kids, you know, they have to say, you know what, I know you want more hockey, I know you want more basketball, but this is 2020. You can't have it all. You can't have a 16 game season. You're going to have an 8, and that's okay.
I appreciate your passion on it, and I agree with putting the expectation or the encouragement or the hope, but putting policy or procedures together that are beyond our enforcement opens us up for additional complexities. And just to be honest about Dan, Chris, me, coaches in our lives, it's just a very complex piece. Over my history of enforcing co-curricular agreements, and Rob would, I think, attest to this, it's a challenge enough, let alone something like this.
Yeah, I don't even think, I mean, legally, I don't think we have the authority to do that, nor do I think we would want that authority as a school board. So I think the suggestion works. And I guess, do we, I know in the past, we have sort of contracts that we ask students to sign when they're engaging in sports. I see Steve nodding, so we still have that. I'm wondering if like this sort of team code of conduct, you know, we could put some of this stuff together once we agree, you know, on some of the parameters of what we're asking into sort of a contract that we may ask our parents and our student athletes to sign. Again, just so this arrangement is clear, like what we're trying to do and expectations, and that way it's also on paper, and we're getting commitments. And again, it's not binding, but I think that way everybody's on the same page of what we're all signing up for. And I don't know if that can be done, but it's
an amendment to the co-curricular agreement. I think Dan has already started that with a COVID type approach.
perfect.
And we can certainly amend the athletic co-curricular agreement, which requires signatures of parents, students, and coaches, I think.
Is there any, does anybody not like number 2 or not think it should be part of where we're going? That was a pretty easy question to ask. Okay, so we'll move on to number 3. Which are develop, circulate, and adhere to clear quarantine policy for teams. I assume this is something, I don't know if we have it, but I assume that the state has this. You know, when there's, because we know there's a quarantine policy, when there's a positive case, certain things happen. Do the state have that also for teams, Steve? Or would we have to recreate it?
I don't know. I think we've applied the quarantining guidelines more on a case by case. But if the request is that Amy, Chris, Dan, and I get together and talk about a team guideline, I think I get that, and we would be happy to develop implications of a positive test on a team and what would that mean for the quarantine of the whole group. Happy to do that. I mean, it is conceivable at some times that you could have a positive test and not necessarily be 6 feet for 10 minutes from that person. But I think because of the activity and where we're going, I think we would err on the side. And I think what we're looking for is a team-wide implementation to a quarantine if there's a positive test. And we're happy to look deeper into that and talk with Amy, Nicole, and Jean. Our nurses are very strong in understanding implications, but I think we can develop a team-wide quarantine policy and put it in the ACCA.
What's the ACCA? Just Steve,
athletic co-curricular agreement. Say a new abbreviation. It's the athletic co-curricular agreement.
Perfect. I'm just trying to make sure I got all the acronyms.
Rob smile at that one, so it's been long.
In my world, that's the Armed Career Criminal Act. So this is better, and you're.
I like ours better.
So does anybody have any issues or not think that should be part of a proposal? Okay, perfect. All right, so number 4 is develop and circulate and adhere to or come up with some clear conditions. And this is sort of what I describe as sort of a no-go decision. Like what as we look at the external environment, you know, what are those decision points where we're like, it's ridiculous for us to continue to go play games. And I would like to see that developed, you know, at least a draft at maybe our next meeting again, so we don't get to January 7th and be debating what are those conditions before we make decisions on if those conditions are too much. So it would be good to have that ahead of time before we get to a go, no go decision. So so that would be my request. It doesn't have to be a final version, but if we can get a draft, you know, at our next meeting of what some of those metrics are, we can at least have a conversation about it.
And Amy and I have had discussions of the discussion, so to speak, like when do we say no and how do we do it, and getting everybody together and figuring out we're happy to at least put some energy behind it. It's a pretty complex thing, but certainly start working on it.
And yeah, I think it's important, especially for Dan, who's running the athletic program, to have some of those, and help create them and also have them so that he feels informed in how to make these decisions. So, does anybody not like this as part of a proposal?
So is this like a matrix that we're coming up with, kind of, that we would?
I don't know if it's a matrix or a threshold, because I don't think there's going to be degrees. We're either, at some point it's either do we continue or not continue, and when do we not continue? But Amy, Chris, Dan, Jean, Nicole, and I will get together and figure this stuff out.
And it could even be, what it looks like here in Hopkinton, but what are conditions in other towns that we may be going to play in? Like, what is too much if town X has X number of cases in the community? Like, is there, what are those decision points? It might be good to have those listed.
Yeah, it's absolutely fair. I'm with you.
I think some of, what happened in the fall, as I was speaking with Dan about it, was, if teams had cases, then we didn't play them in the fall, but there might be some other variables like, does the gym that we're going into allow fans, things like that.
Yeah, thank you.
What is there? So,
yeah,
you guys got it.
All right. So the next one is, and I think this was part of Dan's original proposal, but no fans at games to start.
And just to give an update, Jim, you and I have been talking about Pix a lot for a while. So we have contracted and we have an install date of a system in which you can stream games in that gym online, and through Dan's hard work and Michelle's and Maddie Stone's, and that we believe it will be ready before any game. The install date is, first one is for wiring during the holiday break, and then the first week, as long as, you know how my life is, we'll have the snowstorm the day they're supposed to come and install. But as long as that happens, we will be able to have streaming of games in the Hopkinton gym before the first game, just to make sure that's there.
Thanks, Steve. That's great. And that's good for the community to know. So we're not taking away the observation of a game. If we have no fans, people will still be able to watch them and be part of the action, so to speak.
So Dan's proposal, I think, was a little more fluid. This is a little stricter. I'm in favor of the stricter version. There's no reason to bring more people into the gym than is absolutely necessary. And so I support the absolute statement in this proposal.
And then, the possibility of a senior night, I think we can have a possibility of anything. It all depends on how things proceed. So I have no issue. We could keep that in there or take it out, but we'll see sort of how the world looks and what we can offer. So I'll ask the same question. Does anybody not think that should be part of a proposal? All right. And so number 6 is how we want to ask or instruct this sort of period for our teams to be practicing, whether or not it's full practice as they normally would. We've been allowing our teams to do skills and drills in open gym. So it's sort of a question what's sort of the protocols that we're asking teams to adhere to in the interim.
I'll speak to this one, Jim. I think that, the increased risk comes because the kids are not going to be maintaining 6 feet. I asked the question, I don't know how many weeks ago it was, about would this be allowed in gym class? And, in gym class, you can do a basketball unit so long as kids have masks on or at 6 feet. That's okay. But the elevated risk in both sports begins really because we're changing that dynamic. So I think the essence of the proposal is that is recognized, that basketball practice as usual. And, and again, referring to Dennis Kolomainen's email this morning, that he is, very aware of the risks in structuring practice in a way to keep his players as safe as possible so they can go for as long as possible. And I'm sure that the basketball coaches would be thinking about that as well. So I think that the desire of those coaches is to be able to move away from skills and drills and balance that with COVID in mind. And I think we ought to give them that latitude because that is what increases the risk.
Where I felt the other night, as I felt that we were being pressured as a board that we need to make a decision for them to start able to scrimmage so they can make teams. And, you know, in that moment, I felt that, you know, we weren't having a discussion like this and being told that we had to go in this direction before we could actually determine where's our level of being comfortable. You know, I'm going to be open and honest with you. I said, it may not get to the point where they're going to be able to do that to start to make those teams that you guys are going to probably have to look at a different way of reevaluating these kids to make your teams and determine how they make it. And I don't know how Dan would do that. I don't know how he would go ahead moving forward with that. But, you know, I think you have to look at the possibility of saying, you know what, I don't know how I'm going to be able to evaluate these kids without having a scrimmage, but I'm damn lucky that I'm going to have a season if the board approves it. So, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You know, when you look at how do you evaluate having a team and how you get to having a team, if I can abide by what the school board believes is safe for the community and safe for the school district. I just don't want to be, I want to be respectfully say this, bullied that I have to make a decision in order to accommodate putting a team for the Hawks. So I'm just trying to, I'm trying to find common ground on how we get there.
So just for clarity purposes, there's a couple of degrees here. There's a prohibition against anything, and that's how we started with everything was going to be 6 feet. And then there's understanding that the risk increases when you're in there. So limiting that to the least possible amount of a practice, understanding that coaches, Rob, I think you agree, if I was coaching right now, I would like to do everything I can to provide safety and we can continue. That being said, if you're getting prepared for you can't prepare for a total season and not have any within 6 feet. But I would, if I was a varsity basketball coach, JV or middle school, I would understand this risk and limit it to what I felt as a coach, the bare minimum to make sure they were safely prepared, worked under intense environments and did all that stuff so they were ready. But also, and I agree with you, Rob, that from Dennis's email and the other emails I've received, they understand. And I think they would design their practices maximizing the 6 feet space, but also having minimal live action, if you will, to make sure they're getting ready. But if there's is it a prohibition or is it limited based on coach's judgment? That clarification is important to operate under this agreement. And I'm not trying to be testy.
So I hear what you guys are saying, and I guess as long as the I guess live action, as you described it, Steve, remains and I'll just use the word the bubble of the team because I don't know what other words you use. So as long as there's I know like other sports, and I assume these sports too, preseason they do scrimmaging, with sometimes the middle school team, the varsity or JV team will scrimmage, and I guess at this point I would keep the live action in the unit itself and not sort of allow for multi-team scrimmaging and all that, which I know is valuable because it is sort of live action that you can prepare for a season, but I think keeping our teams in separate units is probably the right way to do it.
No, and I think that makes sense. And I know of no plans to scrimmage or preseason stuff with other schools at all. Dan's talked about the cohort approach during the season, and yes, keeping it with those 11 kids that we've talked about, right? Those 11 kids as a group, the gym exchange, and new 11 kids. No, I think so, and still minimizing the contact and things like that. But I think coach's discretion, as Rob alluded to, I think is a good approach, and I do think they take this very seriously.
All right. Any other? Well, is there anything else? So, is there anything else we want to add to this list? And then we can kind of walk through where I think we are. But is there any other items that are not on this list that folks might want to include?
And I don't know if it needs to be on this list. I think it goes to the no-go line, but and it just goes without saying, I suppose, that if there were conditions where the school board woke up in the morning and Steve said, we need to have a conversation, that this could all stop on a dime. But I think that's with anything, right? So I don't think it needs to be here, but just so people know.
And I think that's in Dan's proposal from the very beginning, that we can pull, the board can cease, suspend for safety, for any reason, but certainly would be for safety reasons. So we get that.
And I think the board has that prerogative, but I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but I think Steve, you have that prerogative as well as superintendent. If you're seeing things that, you don't feel is safe, you don't have to wait for us to make a decision. I think you could definitely make that decision as well.
No, I agree. And I think Dan, Chris and I don't, we wouldn't fight about it. Believe me, this isn't, and we've shown that, safety is paramount. And if there are too many cases with us or whatever, we would stop. And again, in the fall, people cancel the state championship game.
Yeah.
So I think the priorities are in the right place.
I'm just going to say something real quick. I want to, we keep pushing the envelope more and more with this, and I respect that, as a board. I respect everyone here. I respect the 66 people that are out there. I respect that we took the time, not 11 o'clock at night, to make a hasty decision. I do encourage the community to stop pushing and give us an opportunity to try and execute something if we agree on something. That's with respect and understanding. We're all entitled to an opinion, but saying with respect to the community, you can say we have something to start. You have the social, you have the mental, you have the physical. You have that relationship with your child. You have it with your teammates. You have something to start. This virus is spreading. We have an additional 2 more cases in Hopkinton today. It's affecting homes. It's affecting everyone. And I'm just going to say one thing, and I'll turn off my mic because I know Steve has to go. But I want to say that we have to understand that as an elected board, we are trying to provide an education for the kids. But we have to remember that there's other people in this community that pay taxes that have no kids in our school that also are having to be concerned about this virus being spread. They all pay taxes. The 60-year-old woman over on Pine Street who has no kids, who pays year after year our tax increase, we still have to protect her. And I know that's where we have a difference of opinion sometimes, but I respect each and every one of you for taking the time to look at this, to understand that we have to balance this community spread together. And I would just explore to the community to understand that this is a smart approach to get there, to help until we really know where this thing is going, which I think is going to be very dark in a couple of weeks. I just want to put that out there for a second.
Thanks, Norm. So I didn't hear anybody offer any additional items that we want to put here in a proposal. So let me just walk through where I think we are, and then I think we can all sort of comment on this as sort of a package. So I think we would, under this proposal, allow for basketball and hockey to continue with normal practice, but understanding that coaches are going to do their utmost on health and safety in order to make sure that our athletes and community are doing the most they can to remain safe. We would put together an addendum, I don't know what the right word is, to our normal contracts that we have for teams to state clearly that athletes would remain remote if they agree to play, that they would remain remote if we go back into a hybrid model. There would be, we haven't made a decision around what that means for siblings and coaches. But I think we are stating pretty strongly that that would be that's under consideration. So families should be aware that any sort of remote restriction may extend to the family, to family members. We would ensure that there is a strong code of conduct around messaging around mask habits and responsibilities of student athletes to the team and to the community. Steve will work with Dan, Amy, and Chris and others to develop and circulate a clear quarantine policy for teams so that everybody understands if there are cases, what that means for the team and what it means for individual players and their families. We would ask at our next meeting, which is on Thursday, that we start to develop a draft of what kind of conditions would lead to really it's a no-go decision. I think what kind of conditions would lead to a no-go decision, either for the season, either for individual games, like what does that look like? And so again, we're going to task Steve to work with Dan, Amy, and Chris, and whoever else makes sense to start to develop those, bring them to the meeting. We didn't quite talk about it, but I think it's implied that January 7th is this board's last meeting, I think, before some of the seasons start. And so that would be the opportunity for us to make a no-go decision, at least for the start of a season. And then we would allow no fans at games to start. And I think this would probably, for basketball, since we control that, I think that's easier for us. I think this would have to be an agreement as well with for hockey, with the full hockey program. And I guess I'm not sure if that decision has been made by John Stark, but this would probably be something that Dan would have to have a conversation with them to make sure that whether or not they're in agreement. I think we would be agreeing that we wouldn't participate if there were fans. And I think I covered it all. Was there anything else I missed there?
What about consistently checking the air quality? Do we have something like that to consistently, the environment, making sure that the gym at all times is, being
Steve, do you want? Yeah, Steve, do you want to talk about the balancing?
Right. So we have had one of our people up in the rafters of the gym measuring, and we're also looking at that number. And we've also talked about bringing a balancing company, and we've also added an additional air circulator in the gym that we had for the preschool room during the construction, all that fun stuff that Jay Burgess had. So we have additional circulation, and we have Norm check and check the air circulation in the gym. We did it in our in-house, and I'm going to check that this week. We have tried to get a formal air balancer in, but that just it's a busy time, believe it or not. I'm sure you believe, for air balancing world. But we've had added circulation, and we've checked it in-house, and if we need to, we have connected with a firm to do it out-house.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just trying to think outside the box. That
I'm glad you mentioned it.
I'm just trying to think of everything. So thank you.
No problem.
All right, so that I think, so what I just described and what Rob has, what we have here is, I think, the proposal that's in front of us. I'm hearing no other items. And so I guess I'm going to stop sharing here so I can see all your beautiful faces. And I guess what I would ask, if there's any comments or anybody wants to speak to this as a proposal, I think now is probably a good time to do so.
Just wanted to make a quick comment. I know that we had a really long meeting on Thursday, and we're back here on Saturday. And so I really appreciate the willingness of this board to continue to listen and debate, listen to the community and one another. I think that these are not easy conversations, but important conversations. And so I appreciate the work that's been done. While we may not agree on all of the things, I think that what's been brought forward today, to me at least, feels like a good compromise.
I mean, I'll just say, I've been pretty direct and frank about what I see as risks with some of these sports, and I still feel that way. This is a good mitigation of risk. It's not an elimination of risk, I think, as Seth has been saying. I've spent a lot of time on this board and then in previous work, trying to thread needles, trying to find ways to bring, to try to find ways to move forward, especially when there's strong disagreement on issues in the community. There's usually a middle ground. I'll just say on this one, I struggled a lot with finding a middle ground. We're in a strange time, and this is a high risk activity that we know. And I appreciate the mental health and the physical health and the leadership skills. I mean, those are all really important. And so I do appreciate the compromises and the work that's been done here. And the only thing I would just want to end on is, these are individual decisions. We're going to have families and parents making individual decisions for how they want, how they feel safe and how they want their students to participate in these activities. And individual decisions carry risk, both for the family and the individual. But in the world that we're in and with the pandemic that we have, individual decisions that may feel low risk also carry risks to the community. And so the one decision I may make may not have consequences. But if all of us are making risky decisions, those decisions add up to being a risk to the community. And that's sort of how this virus spreads. And so I would just ask, and I have confidence in our families and our students, and but just be aware that these are high risk activities, that this isn't something that we're not taking it lightly. And I think families aren't taking it lightly and shouldn't. And because the choices they are making do carry risks to the community. And as we move through the holiday season, just be aware that cases are going to go up, risks are going to increase around us. And I think, you know, the privilege of having sports continue is just that. They're privileges, and it should be treated that way. And do our best to keep us all safe, because our season will be successful if and only if the individual decisions we all make keep us at a certain risk level, and keep community spread down. That's what's hanging this all together.
I'm just going to take one moment, and I'd like to just speak to students that might be listening. You guys are, you know, this is your time to take what's in front of you and be responsible and show leadership through your actions. And the behavior on teams is going to make this work or not work. And that lies on all of you, whether you're, you know, a 13-year-old middle school student or, you know, a senior in high school. So collectively, imploring, asking, begging you to really examine as a team and as an individual how you can best help your teammates and help yourselves and help your families. I know it's a lot for a kid, but that's where we're at, and this is your historic time.
I'll just associate myself with what Jim and Rob just said. You know, from the beginning of this pandemic, we've said we're all in this together. It's become a cliche, but this is an example of what that means. We have taken a step that I think none of us are 100% comfortable with, but we're doing it because we're balancing out various risks. And you all know, all of you, all the students know what it means, what steps you can take to mitigate risk. And if you don't, this will fall apart. And so so our part of being in this together is to provide the opportunity. Your part of being in this together is working to make it work. And we're trusting you to do that. And we'll see how it goes. But I am willing to put my trust in the students and the coaches and to take this risk. And I do want to make clear it is a risk.
I've been pretty vocal, but you know, I'm a very reasonable guy, you know, if you get to know me. You know, I'm gonna be quick. You know, I had a lot of emails from a lot of parents over the last couple of days, a lot of phone calls, a lot of text messages. They weren't the greatest. I mean, and I understand that and I respect that, you know, and we are very passionate about our kids. I mean, I love my kids as much as we all do. I love our teachers. I love this community more than this town will ever know. You know, I serve this board, I serve this community, and I give it my all, and I always have. I see what you guys say about us. We're elected officials that are trying to do our best in this community and trying to provide an education to your kids and also provide them with everything that they need in order to provide to meet their needs. And that is through sports, that's through education. But there's other people in this town who don't have that we have to be concerned about for the community. You guys need to do your job. If your kids want to go hang out and do something, no, stay home, stay in the bubble and be responsible and show that we can control this if we move forward with this. You know, we talk about the mental health part, you know, and it is a big concern for me. You know, I hope that the school district is in touch with Chief Pecora, you know, regarding this at all times, because there's individuals that are struggling regardless of not having sports in their life. And this is a big concern. It struck a chord the other day. You know, I'm at the dinner room table eating, and where is the level of the community's kind of overstepping their boundaries a little bit, with all due respect, where I have my son asking me about winter sports because there's kids in his class asking about me approving it. And my son doesn't play sports, and I'm kind of like, now we're going to a school board member's son to try wiggle some room out of there. It was a little uncomfortable. And I'm not trying to like point anyone in the community. I have all respect for all of you and everything, but I make a decision that's ethically, that's with my heart and trying to do what's best for everybody. But I do ask you, try to be respectful to all of us and understand we're just trying to do our job. We all have kids, that have been in school, that have gone through school, or even if you don't have kids in school, we are bound to try and do the best we can. I wish you guys a good couple of weeks if we accept this, and just know it takes two to do this. And I think, one last thing, Steve, do you remember the last time we had a board meeting on Saturday?
I do.
It was the start of this public
It was
health
the
crisis.
date of the proposed annual school district meeting that.
Correct.
No, I do.
So I want the community to remember that 9 months ago, these three were elected and we had to figure things out. Thank you.
All right, so excuse me. So what we didn't do this last time, but I think it's probably appropriate to do tonight. So I would ask for, I'm going to ask for a motion, and I'm going to try to word it in a way that we'll all understand. And if you don't, you can kick me under the table. So I would ask if there's a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve hockey and basketball for the winter season in a proposal as discussed here this morning. So I'll stop there.
So moved.
Second.
And I guess my question would be to make sure everybody understands. I sort of outlined where we were, and I just want to make sure everybody understands, what we're voting on. I see a lot of nodding heads. Steve, does that make sense to you in terms of a motion and
Yes.
where we're at? Okay.
And the recording's running, so if we have questions, we can go back. So thank you.
Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Nato.
Rob Nato, yes.
Seth?
Beth A. yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm?
Yes.
And Jim O'Brien is yes. And so I believe we've made progress. And so I just again want to thank everybody for your work and the conversation here, and thank all the members of the public who have reached out both on all sides to help inform our conversation and our thinking on this. So thank you very much. And so as we said at the top, I would ask if there's a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to go into non-public session under RSA 91A:3, Roman 2C for reputation.
I make
I'm
that
just gonna
motion.
Take off, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
I appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
Have a good
great rest of
weekend.
the weekend.